Hi, I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for anyone who loves hearing fascinating tales about remarkable people, intriguing topics, and significant historical events. Our hope is to inspire you to uncover and share your history and your story. Few television shows have left as lasting an impression as Lassie, and few child actors became as beloved as Jon Provost, who played Timmy Martin from 1957 to 1964. But Jon's career began even before Lassie, when, at just 3 years old, he starred alongside Jane Wyman in the 1953 movie So Big. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, Jon, who has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, takes us back to his Hollywood days, sharing memories of working with his Lassie co-stars June Lockhart, Hugh Reilly, and of course, America's favorite dog, Lassie. Jon will also talk about working with legendary trainer Rudd Weatherwax and how those years helped instill in him a lifelong love for animals and a passion for helping others. We will also hear about Jon's life after Lassie and the great work he continues to do today. So sit back and enjoy as we go behind the scenes of one of television's most iconic shows with Jon Provost. I'd now like to welcome Jon Provost to our show. Welcome, Jon.
Hey, thank you, James. Pleasure to be here.
So I was a TV head as a kid, but I'll tell you, we watched some really, really great shows growing up, and one of them was Lassie.
Well, thank you. Yes, and it's amazing. Well, maybe it's not amazing, but no one has ever come up to me, James, and said, "We hated Lassie." It's just, never happened. They say, "Well, you got in a lot of trouble and this and that, and Lassie always saved you." But yeah, no, never. The only thing I have had, I do some of the Comic Cons and those kind of things, autograph shows. We used to call them autograph shows. And I can remember a young man came up to me a couple of years ago and he goes, "I think I've heard of the show Lassie." Yeah, it's on 24/7. It's on in over 60 countries in reruns. And in the US, it's on over a dozen different cable, channels. So it's out there and people are watching it and it's black and white. It's amazing.
It's black and white. I think my aunt had a dog, and I think the dog's name was Skipper, but it looked like Lassie, but he was miniature. He was smaller,
Okay, probably a Sheltie then.
a Sheltie, but it reminded me. But I used to call it the Lassie dog. That was the
Sure, sure. Well, collies and Shelties look, they're just like a collie. They're a different dog, different breed. But for years, I mean, everybody, if they saw a collie, it's like, oh, look, it's a Lassie. It's a Lassie dog.
exactly. Well, I want to start where probably a lot of people who interview you start with, and that's how did you get into show business I think you got into show business at like 3 years of age. How did that come about?
Well, guess what? I didn't have a lot of say in it. Not at almost 3 years old, but yeah, just to encapsulate it, both of my parents are not Hollywood show people. They're both from the South. My mom is from northeastern Texas, and my father was from Mobile, Alabama. But they met in Hollywood and got married in like 1940. My father was an aeronautical engineer, and my mother was a seamstress. And then she became a housewife. So I was the youngest of three, and we were living in Pasadena at the time. And mom read in the LA Times that Warner Brothers was looking for a 2 to 3 year old blonde boy. And I did have a lot of blonde hair back in the day, to be in this movie starring Jane Wyman. Well, mom, growing up on this little farm in Texas, her idol was Jane Wyman. So she got it in her head that if she took me on this audition, she was going to meet Jane Wyman and get her autograph. Seriously, that's the only reason she took me. My father told her, you're crazy, you don't want to go there, that's in Hollywood. We don't even live in Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. So long story short, she convinced Dad to draw her a map on how to get from our house to Warner Brothers studio. And Mom took me, and there were over 200. They used to call them, it was a cattle call, is what they called them. Over 200 little boys and some little girls, moms had cut their hair, to be in this movie. And so as the day would progress, they would take a couple of us into a room without our parent. And, you'd be all these adults in there, and they'd say, like, okay, John, go over to this man and say, hi, Daddy. Well, a lot of kids, that's not my daddy. They just wouldn't do it. Well, evidently I did what I was told. And so long story short, the other kids would go away, but they kept telling me to stay, and tell my mother, just stay, don't leave. Towards the end of the day, a rather large, flamboyant woman came up to my mother and said, Mrs. Provost, I do believe your son is going to get this part. And Mom said, well, I'm not here for that. I want to get Jane Wyman's autograph. And the woman said, well, don't worry about that. That you will get her autograph. But what we need to know is who your agent is. And my mom looked at this woman and said, oh, no, no, no. We own a home. We don't need an agent. James, Mom did not have a clue what was going on. So the woman says, no, no, no. A theatrical agent to represent your son. Mom says, well, where do I find one of those? And the woman said, well, my name is Lola Moore. I'm the #1 child agent in Hollywood, and I would be more than willing to represent your son. Mom says, well, how much is that going to cost us? And she said, well, no money up front. I will just take 10% of whatever your son makes. And Mom said, nah, that sounds reasonable. So long story short, my first audition, ended up getting the job, getting an agent, and Mom did get her autograph. And then that started the ball rolling. So I'm a big believer in being in the right place at the right time and then acting on that. I didn't, my mom did, but that started it all.
So at 3 years old, I mean, very few of us have memories at 3 years of age, I guess, right? But you were in movies in your very early years with Jane Wyman, with Bing Crosby, Grace Kelly, Natalie Wood. I mean, these are huge names. Was your mother able to meet some of these people or at least see these
Oh,
people?
sure. Oh, sure. But you know what? As you mentioned, I was so young. I don't remember the first two movies. I have them. I've seen them, and I know the whole
Yeah.
story behind it, but I have no recollection. So big the first movie. My second movie, as you mentioned, was with Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly, and that was The Country Girl, which Grace Kelly won the Academy Award, and then of course she went on to become Princess Grace. But I don't remember. I don't remember those two at all. The third movie, All Mine to Give, it had two titles, All Mine to Give or The Day They Gave Babies Away. They kept All Mine to Give, and it's a Christmas story, and it's every Christmas it's on, and it's one of those real tear jerkers. And that's when I start to remember. So, up until Lassie, when I was 7, I had been in 10 movies and even some early live television. So, yeah, I was kind of a seasoned actor before Lassie and I started our journey.
But really, John, in all seriousness, you had something that these people were looking for. I mean, you were really, I mean, there's a lot of kids trying out. You really had something.
The key was, well, I was cute.
Hmm.
They want that. And I followed directions. I did what I was, I didn't, I was just, I guess, that kind of a kid. And you have to be able to follow directions being, in show business. And, I never had lessons, never had acting lessons. I basically learned through osmosis, through, being there, watching what the other people did. And it just was a natural thing for me. I enjoyed it, it was fun. it was just easy, I guess, to say.
Because you could have some kid who's really cute, but they could be out of control or they could be disinterested or causing trouble on the
Sure.
set.
Oh, I have grandchildren. I know what that. But yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Uh, so if you couldn't get over that, then they had to move on, and because yeah, you may have the look that they're looking for, but if you can't take directions and you can't act and you can't do that, then it's not going to work.
Mm. Now, there was a movie called Escaped in Japan, I think was the name of it.
Escapade in Japan.
Oh, Escapade. You know, I've got
Escapade.
my
Yeah.
bifocals. I was looking at the wrong slide. Yes, so Escapade in Japan, 1957. So you probably remember at age 7 a little bit
Oh
about it.
boy. Yeah. Well, okay. I was under contract at that time with RKO, which at that time was still owned by Howard Hughes. And he was just getting ready to sell the studio to Desi and Lucy. And then the studios became Desi Lou. So the movie in Japan was the last movie that RKO made. It was considered a bridge movie, one of the first movies filmed in Japan. Well, one of the first American movies filmed in Japan after the wars. It was actually 1956, and it was only like 11 years after the war. So nobody knew what was really going to go on and what was going to happen. But mom and I went, we spent 3.5 months in Japan when I was 6 years old. And I remember it vividly, had a great time. People were wonderful. The crazy part was my mother was, we're all short in our family, okay? I'm like, I used to think I was 5'4", now I'm 5'2".
I
That
know, I'm
happened.
shrinking too.
Yeah, well, that happens. But so and blonde hair. And mom had, mom was very beautiful and really long blonde hair. Well, when we were in Japan, it's like they had never seen people with blonde hair. And everywhere we went, they just wanted to touch our hair, to
Mhm.
see what was going on there. And but very, very respectful. Not like trying to rip your hair out or your clothes off, things like that.
Mhm.
So it was a great experience. And that starred Teresa Wright and Cameron Mitchell, who Cameron, it was the second time he played my father. He played my father in the earlier movie I mentioned, All Mine to Give, because they were two RKO movies. And then as we were in Japan, they were looking for the boy to be Timmy on Lassie. Tommy Reddick had played Jeff Miller on the show for 3 years, and I used to watch the series. I loved it. But Tommy, he was 17. He wanted to move on, and so he wanted out. And so they wanted a new little kid, and they couldn't find the kid they were looking for. They had all the cattle calls, whatever, couldn't find the kid. And so the producer of Lassie was having his wife was having lunch with the producer of the movie Escapade in Japan. Came up, they were looking for the child, and she goes, "Well, wait a minute. It sounds like the boy you're looking for is in Japan right now." And so when I came back from Japan, I met with the producers of Lassie, and they all said, "Yes, we want you to be Timmy. But how do you get along with a big dog?" Well, I'd always been raised with animals, and at that time we were living. We had moved because my father was working for a different aircraft company, and we were out in Pomona and had, a little mini farm, you might say. My sister had a horse, and we had a goat, and my dad had a flock of pigeons, and, what have you. So it was not an issue for me to be around animals and big dogs, but they wanted to see how it would work. So I actually went and lived with Rudd Weatherwax, the owner of Lassie and Lassie's descendants, on his ranch for a long weekend. Came back to the studio the following Monday and walked into the producer's office, and Lassie gave me two paws up. I got the job.
I love it. To last year's part of the interview process.
Yeah, of course. Well, I had to get Lassie's permission, right? Lassie's, got this little kid he's going to be working with, so had to make it work.
Yeah, I want to say this is when I've spoken to other child actors and actresses, and I've read about situations where the family, once their child becomes engaged in acting, that sometimes the family all like they abandon their previous life and the father becomes an agent or the mother's the agent and they're on the set all the time and involved. What was it like in your house when all of a sudden you're Timmy and Lassie? I mean, how did that go over in your family?
Well, it did kind of it threw a monkey wrench into things. I mean, because when you're filming movies, it's a month or a couple months or whatever. When you're doing a series, and back then, we did between 34 and 36 half-hour episodes a year. We worked 9 months out of the year to film Lassie. Nowadays, couple months, your series, you're done. So it was a big, big deal. And that was one thing about how it did disrupt our normal family life. Like I said, my father was an aeronautical engineer. All he cared about was designing airplanes. Mom's thing with me and acting, that was mom's thing. But it worked. And the only thing is that I mentioned earlier, I was the youngest of three. So it did have an effect on my older brother and older sister, who were not really in the business. They did work a little bit, but it wasn't their thing. And that's one reason, James, that Lori and I, my wife, who's the author, we decided to write my autobiography. And it's not just about, life in Hollywood. It's about how this, celebrity that was in the family affected this regular American family that wasn't in the business. So, yeah, it's a different story for sure.
Yes, and the name of your book is Timmy's in the Well, the John
Which
Provost
never
story.
happened. Everybody, what is it, girl? Timmy in the well? People say it all the time. Their cat comes up and meows to them. What is it, Timmy? It never happened. And thank you, mother. Mom kept every script. So I thought I fell in a well. You know, I mean, off cliffs, into abandoned, mine shafts, into culverts, you name it, into rivers, into lakes, quicksand, which one time Timmy was in quicksand. I don't even think that's real, but whatever. So yeah, but no, it never happened. I never did fall in a well. We read every script, never happened. And we did find one script where some bad guys fell in an old abandoned well on the Martin property, and of course, Timmy and Lassie saved them. But it never happened to me. We have not a clue where that came from.
But it sounds like a great title for your book.
Oh, yeah, well, it was it. We couldn't think of a title, and Lori's on the phone to a girlfriend of hers, and she said, "Oh, come on, Timmy's in the well." And it's, we all have bumps in our life, it's not a smooth road. And so there were a few bumps, but I never fell in the well.
That's interesting. So last night we went out to dinner with two very dear friends of ours, and the woman is quite a bit younger than I am. And I mentioned who I was going to be speaking with today, and I said, "Oh, Jon Provost. He was on Lassie." She says, "Timmy's in the well."
There you go. I mean, yeah, we watch the late night shows and stuff, and you know, like once a week or something, Colbert or Kimmel or somebody will make reference to it. I mean, Carson used to. It's crazy.
So people have to get the book to find out the full story of Timmy.
There's a lot more going on there. And originally it came out in '08, and there's a lot that's transpired since then. So we did an updated version last year, and added a whole bunch more pictures, and more. It is pouring out here right now. Sorry.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
oh yeah, no, it just started outside. But yeah, so anyway, it's in brick and mortar, or my website, johnprovost.com.
So First of all, in order to prepare for this episode, my wife and I, because it's been a long time since I had watched Lassie, so we watched 3 episodes. And I said to Kelly, my wife Kelly, I said, I want to watch these episodes. One thing I do remember was I always seem to cry during Lassie for some reason. And I thought, I don't know if I remember that correctly. So we watched the episode. Wouldn't you know it? Darn it, I cried at 66 years old and I was crying during one of the episodes.
It still works.
But it was a happy episode. They were happy, and yet they brought out this emotion. You had the uh, the young man. His name was Tommy Rettig. He's the one who handed over Lassie to you,
Yes,
Timmy, your character, and
right.
it was that scene.
I'm visualizing it right now.
Yeah, that and you were so relieved because you were so sad, and then you were happy, and then the end of the movie, the end of the movie, and the music, and the dog, and the little whimpering, and
Oh
I said
yeah.
to Kelly, darn it, they've done it to me again.
But James, it's a good cry.
A good cry for sure.
I mean, I have heard this story over and over again, and but it's always it's a good it's good to get those emotions out, and like I said, it was a good cry because everything always worked out okay in
Mhm.
the end. Every episode, whatever it happened to be a hurt animal or a person or everything always ended on a good note. So,
Yes, and the ones that we watched, it was all the case. But just so I can understand and our listeners can understand it, so Lassie, the character Lassie, went pretty far back, I think, into the 1940s, wasn't it? And
oh yeah,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
the original movie Lassie Come Home, 1943, Elizabeth Taylor and Roddy McDowall, who were like, 12 years old. So yeah, that was the first Lassie movie. Rudd Weatherwax, the owner, trainer, breeder of Lassies, of all the Lassies since 1940. Um, and yeah, that started it all. They did, I believe, 5 or 6 Lassie movies, and then the first television series. Actually, wait a minute. We're on radio, correct? Guess what? There was a Lassie radio program. Now you remember how they had the Lone Ranger and the Green Lantern and all of those radio shows. There was a Lassie radio show, and I found this out years ago. I was at a retro radio show, and guy comes up and says, "Hey, did you ever hear any of the Lassie radio shows?" No, I never even knew they existed. It was a half-hour radio show. They would do an episode. Rudd Weatherwax would announce the show, and Lassie was actually in the booth and would bark. That
I
was
love
Lassie's only job, was to bark. But and that lasted, I think, about a year, and then they started the television in 1954 was the first Lassie, and then Tommy did it for 3 years. I came in 57 and did it for 7 years.
Yeah, and I think it's those years that I remember the most. I mean, I was born in 58, but I remember watching the reruns, and I do remember faintly when they were first run. But this is actually a podcast, not a radio, but it's kind of the same thing. And
Okay,
it'd be like Lassie having a podcast.
there you go. All right. Yeah, we
So
didn't have podcasts.
you didn't have podcasts then, but so the character of Timmy is introduced. Could you tell us how he was introduced and how he took over as Lassie's master?
Sure. Timmy was basically an orphan. He was living with his grandparents and overheard them. They were elderly, of course, and they overheard them saying, we love him, but we're old and we can't take care of him anymore. And so he ran away and found the Martin barn. And Lassie found Timmy hiding in the barn one night. The family, they came out, and then it was Tommy, Jeff Miller, his mother, and Gramps. He didn't have a father. And they came out and basically took Timmy in. Gramps passed away. Tommy was going off to college or going off to school. And so he gave me Lassie. And then I stayed with the mother, his mom, and she couldn't take care of the farm, so she had to sell the farm. So she sold the farm to the Martin family. When they bought the farm, they got the kid, the dog, the tractor. It was all part of the deal. And so that's how they made the transition from Tommy to Timmy.
And that's the episode that one of the episodes that we watched yesterday, and that made me cry. So let's move on to on the set. I'm fascinated while I was watching these episodes. I was watching the dog, I was watching you, I was watching some of the other actors, and I'm thinking there's somebody very close to that set who is giving commands to that dog,
Mhm.
but you're also having to repeat lines. You're saying lines while the dog is having to do these things. What was the set like? What do you remember as far as that dynamic going on the set?
Well, one thing, we only had one Lassie at a time. There wasn't a lot like five dogs on the set to do different things. I mean, other shows, that's what they did. But with Rudd Weatherwax, one Lassie at a time. Lassie did have a stand-in, which was also Lassie's double. If Lassie had to do fighting or swimming or, get all filthy or something like that. I mean, we didn't have, especially swimming, we didn't have handheld hair dryers. It took a week to dry a collie. So they had to have another one, to do those things. But I'm sorry, the question again.
So when you were on the set
Oh,
of
yes. Yeah. Oh,
that,
the training.
yep,
Yes.
yep, yep.
Sorry. Okay. The Rudd Weatherwax, and he had his number one trainer, Sam, and then one of Rudd's two sons, Jackie, the youngest, and Bob or Robert, the oldest son, would be the other assistant trainers. So when we were doing their dialogue and they had to give Lassie a command, because Lassie wouldn't do anything that I told him to do. If I said, I mean, I loved Lassie and Lassie loved me and we got along great and we did everything together. But if I told Lassie to do something, it's like, no, you're my friend, you're not my trainer. So we would, half of the commands that Rudd or his trainers would give would be verbal, the other would be hand signals. So if they had to give a verbal command when we were filming, we would have to space our dialogue so they could make the verbal command and then they would cut that out in the sound editing. If they overlapped and our voices overlapped, they would have to reshoot it because they didn't want to have to go back and dub it in and fix it later on. So basically that's we had to know what Lassie was going to do ahead of time so that we could, space our dialogue and make everything work. But it was just, once you got into the mood of things, I mean, it just became a natural way of how we did the show. Once in a while, things would get messed up, but most of the time it worked flawlessly.
John, I mean, you really had to be a smart kid to do that. I'm not just trying to flatter you here, but I'm just trying to picture you had lines to remember. That blows my mind. First of all, you had to, as a little kid, remember these lines, and then you've got all these distractions going on around you, and you got a bunch of adults telling you what to do, and you're interacting with a dog. I give you a lot of credit because you were very believable.
Well, it's as far as the dialogue thing went, I'm dyslexic. I couldn't read back then. And I mean, they didn't know what dyslexia was. There was no word for it back in the day, in the early mid, 50s, 60s. And my mother would read me my dialogue the night before, and I would memorize it. But I would also memorize everybody else's dialogue. For one reason, you had to know, so you had your cue, so you knew when you had to speak your line. But it kind of got me in trouble sometimes because I would tell like June Lockhart, who played my mother, June, that's not your line. Well, that didn't go over too well sometimes, or but no, it was just how it worked.
Wow. Wow. So That's you mentioned June Lockhart, who played on another one of my favorite shows, Lost in Space, and
Of
Hugh
course.
Reilly. Hugh Reilly, I'm not that familiar with, but when I saw his face on the Lassie, I thought, oh yeah, that I now I know where I remember that face
Yeah.
from.
And June's great. And by the way, June will be 100 years old on June the 25th.
God
And
bless.
that, yes, that is so amazing. We have kept in touch over the years. And yeah, June's great. She's almost 100 now. So that is pretty amazing. But yeah, Hugh Reilly was a great guy. He was what you saw on the screen. He was the same guy off screen. But June Lockhart and Hugh Reilly weren't my first parents. When I first started the show, when Tommy handed the dog off to me, it was Cloris Leachman was my mom. She played Ruth Martin, and a man by the name of John Shepherd played my father. Well, if you know Cloris Leachman and June Lockhart, they're like, opposites. In the world, they're opposites. And so after a few months, Cloris decided, whoa, I signed a 6-year contract to bake cookies and be with a kid and a dog. I'm out of here. She did not enjoy it. So they had to replace, but they let her break the contract because obviously, people have to be happy in their work. And so one Sunday, it was Cloris Leachman and John Shepherd as Paul and Ruth Martin. The next Sunday, it was June Lockhart and Hugh Reilly. And James, the studio did not get one letter. People didn't care about the parents. They cared about the kid and the dog. That's what the show was about. But yeah, that didn't last very long with Cloris Leachman. But a great lady, but yeah, a little out there.
So you also had a friend called Boomer.
Yeah, Todd Farrell. He was just for one season. Well, Tommy Reddick, he had his sidekick, Joey Vieira, who played Porky. Yeah, so that's it.
Terrific. So when you're a kid and you mentioned that you didn't know it was called dyslexia, but you had to go to school during this time as well. How did that work out?
Um, all of my schooling, because I started acting so young, was private tutor on the set or private school. Because when you're working in show business and you can't go to public school because if you get a job, you're out of school for a week or 2 months. Well, public school, sorry, you don't graduate, you put you back a year or whatever. Really, the only time I went to regular public school was when I went to college. But getting back to the dyslexia thing, we worked through it. The Rathers that owned the Lassie series, they realized that there was an issue, and I actually went to UCLA to a special clinic there for a year or two when they were working on it. Because, like I said, it was new. Nobody really understood what dyslexia was. And yeah, it's with you your whole life. But yeah, I'm okay.
Yes, you definitely are. Now, when I spoke with a previous guest, Butch Patrick, he told me that
Sure.
he
Oh,
would
yeah.
get, he would go out on the set sometimes and explore. Did you do that as well?
Oh, that's how I helped break the boredom. And oh boy, I loved exploring because under the sound stages, we call them the catacombs. There were these giant storage rooms down there. And, I wasn't supposed to go, but found a way. And, chariots and just, oh, you'd find all this stuff. But the jewel that I found. Now, I'm working at the original RKO Studios, which is now Desilu. RKO did the original King Kong. Now, we all know with Fay Ray, we all know that original King Kong. Well, and it was filmed at that studio. There was one building, a 2-story building that was all concrete with no windows, had a door, big double door, steel doors in the front. I could never get in that building. And I would try, and nobody would tell me what was in there. One day it was unlocked. I went into that building. Well, it was the miniature building, which is where they stored all of the miniatures because back in the day before CGI and all of that, everything was done stop motion. It was all, little models of boats and planes and ships and tanks and this and monsters and dinosaurs and stuff. On the second floor, I found King Kong, the original King Kong, and the animals that he fought. He was only 18 inches tall.
Oh, really?
And oh yeah, there was like four or five of him. One was like just a bust, and then one was, and they were all articulated, so you could move all his arms and everything and his whatever. And so once I found that, and of course I did not touch anything, I knew that. But whenever another kid was on the show, that's where I would take them because
Perfect.
what kid didn't want to see King Kong? Yeah, it was great. Yeah, so that was, so yeah, Butch and I we did, and Butch and I, yeah, I just saw Butch a few months ago at a show. Great guy, the Munsters, come on. Yeah, fun guy, great guy.
Yeah, I love hearing these stories of memories because I try to think about myself, being a 7-year old or an 8-year old or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of things I do remember, but if it was something so unusual like that, I don't know whether you would remember more of it, but it really was your life at that time, though, wasn't it?
Oh, sure. Well, an average day for, a 9, 10, 12, 14-year-old me, 10 hours a day,
Yeah.
5 days a week, 9 months out of the year to shoot Lassie. So yeah, you're on the set. And I worked 5 days a week. I didn't know this, but the regular crew, they worked 6 days a week. They worked on Saturdays.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, but because of the child regulations and all that, mine was all regimented. But yeah, I basically lived on the set. I'd get in the car in the morning, asleep, arrive at the studio, get made up, either go right into school, to start your schooling for the day, or go right into work. And that would be an 8-hour day on the set, and then, home.
Wow. Now, when did you get like summer breaks or like extended periods of time where you went home?
Not a lot. We worked 9 months to film, 1 month. Lassie, and this was 10 months now. Lassie and I would travel around the country, all the major, hot spots, New York, Chicago, Dallas, wherever, and promote the show. There were three networks back then, three, maybe four if you lived in a big metropolitan area. But one thing that was really great, Rudd Weatherwax, Lassie's owner, he would insist if whatever town we were in, if there was a children's hospital, that Timmy and Lassie would go and visit the kids. Well, you're talking, the late 50s, early 60s. There were no service dogs other than guide dogs for the blind. They didn't let dogs into hospital. They didn't let kids into hospitals unless you were sick, but they would let Timmy and Lassie in. So now I'm a 9, 10-year-old kid going into these hospitals, seeing children my age with polio, with tuberculosis, been in a horrible auto accident, and so they're all in traction in a house fire. But when we would walk in that room, those kids would forget the horrors that they had right now. And they would, see Timmy and Lassie, oh my, because they were watching us every Sunday night. Well, now here we are at their hospital bed, giving them an autographed photo, and Lassie licking their face. I mean, come on. It was a super experience, and it really affected me later on in life as my involvement, with service dogs, with war dogs, with no-kill pet shelters, with Canine Companions for Independence. My whole life has revolved around dogs and my experience that I had growing up and seeing what they can do, and especially Rudd Weatherwax. I mean, he was an incredible man. I mean, his training and the love that he had for his animals. And don't get me wrong, he was a tough guy. He was rough, but I loved him and he loved me and he loved his dogs. And that's what I learned, excuse me, from him was respect for the animals. and what they do for us. So, what can I say? I was in the right place at the right time.
You really were. I was gonna ask you about how being on that show impacted you, but really from what I've already read about you and your involvement, with animals and, service dogs, and also isn't there something as far as the military is concerned, weren't you involved in?
War dogs. Yeah, we were. Well, I mentioned Canine Companions for Independence. I was on the Board of Governors for 25 years. Supply service dogs to people that have disabilities other than blindness, free of charge. And we started working with war dogs. I'm Vietnam era, and I know what happened to our dogs over there. Not good. So we worked with the military and to a lot of the teams, when they were done working, the handlers would want, and their dogs are being retired, would want to keep the dogs. Well, they weren't allowed to. Well, we worked with the military, and so now, if a handler wants to keep his dog, he can. And then also, a lot of dogs come back, injured, with a lot of problems, and so we work to help that. And so, yeah, I've been involved with dogs from A to Z, wherever you want to go. And it's just been a wonderful experience. And starting our new company, Provost Pets. For years, I wanted to do something, to help the animals and help our dogs, and the products out there just weren't good enough for me. And so it took us years, and we've developed, our own products, and so we're moving forward with that. So it just goes on and on and on.
And how can, as far as Provost Pets, how can people find out about that? Is that on your website?
It's a website, provostpets.com, or they can go to jonprovost.com, my quote, I guess, theatrical website. And yeah, they can, or Google it. We're there.
When you read about people, maybe who acted all their lives, or they're in a bunch of movies, or just a few earlier in their career, I don't know. I mean, many are, I'm sure, are impacted by those experiences, but yours is so tailored to your character that you love this dog, and it really was ended up being the real Jon Provost story, because you do love animals and it branches into helping people as well. So thank you for what you're doing and continue have done and continue to do. And I wanted to ask, when did you leave Lassie? What was the decision process? How did that come about?
I had a 7-year contract with a 3-year option. 7 years was coming up. I was 14. The hormones are starting to kick in, and I like dogs, but now I'm looking at the ladies, and it's like, well, wait a minute, we got to, and because everybody thought, oh, little Timmy, and I'm 14 now. I was going through the same thing Tommy did. So, long story short, the producers wanted to go for 3 more years for a total of 10, which I would have been, 17. And luckily, the option was ours. So my parents, they said, John, what do you want to do? 3 more years on Lassie, or you can stop now. And I wanted out. So I told my parents, I want to quit Lassie, but I wanted to continue to work. So I quit Lassie. And then, by the way, the producers offered all kinds of perks. At that time, Jack Rather, who owned Lassie, owned Chris Craft Boats. He wanted to give me a yacht. Now, what is a 14-year-old kid gonna do with a 35-foot yacht? It didn't make sense. So they were
Maybe
really trying. They wanted it, but I was done. So I quit Lassie. Unfortunately, when Tommy left, he gave Lassie to me. The show continued. Well, when I left, Lassie ended up with a forest ranger, and it just didn't make sense. So didn't want Lassie, but I wanted to continue acting. So after Lassie, I did Little Mr. Ed, smartest dog, smartest horse. He didn't really talk, but that's another story. Then some more movies. You mentioned Natalie Wood earlier. This Property is Condemned. Natalie Wood, Robert Redford, Charles Bronson, Robert Blake. What a crazy movie. Oh, and we had a great time. We filmed it in, it was a dark movie, a Tennessee Williams play. We filmed it in Louisiana, Mississippi, and that was in 64. The next movie I did was one with Gary Merrill called Secret of the Sacred Forest. One of the worst movies anybody ever made, but you got to make one of those.
Yeah.
We spent 3 months in the Philippines filming it, and I loved it. I was 16, 17, and I had a great time, loved the people, loved the Philippines. Then when I got back to the States, got a call from Disney, and they were going to do a movie called The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes with Kurt Russell. And oh yeah, this sounds like fun. I'd never done a Disney. So I did the Disney movie and had a great time on that. And Kurt Russell was great. As a matter of fact, we both had our birthdays while we were filming. So we're sitting there in the commissary and I'm going, Kurt, I just turned 18 a couple days ago. You just turned 17, and I've been working 15 years and I'm 18. Maybe I'll take a break. And Kurt looked at me and he said, Yeah, Jon, I think you should take a break. Well, I took his advice, but I shouldn't have. Unbeknownst to me, there were going to be two more computer movies
Oh no.
at Disney. And Bradley, my character, would have been in the other two movies. And it was so much fun. I would have done that, but I didn't know about that. So I said, You're right. And that's really, James, when I kind of wrote my own pink slip and I wrote it on Lassie and then I wrote it again. I said, okay, now it's time to just back off for a while. And that's then I started college. I moved up to Northern California, stayed out of the business for, 15 years or so, a little longer than that. Then found out they were doing a new Lassie series down at Universal and got a part in that, did that for 2 years. Had a great lot of fun doing it, but unfortunately it was too kind of sitcom-y, I guess. So it wasn't really Lassie. So we only lasted 2 seasons, but got to work with some great people on that. June Lockhart did a couple episodes. Tommy Reddick did an episode. Roddy McDowell did an episode, and I'd never, he on the original movie had never met him. What a wonderful man he was. Just thoroughly enjoyed him. And then we had a young man on the series, Leonardo DiCaprio. Ever heard of that guy?
Well, I think I have. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he got his first job on the new Lassie series. So you got to start somewhere.
Wow. So really, your career kept going, but only in like a movie here, a movie there, an opportunity there. But so your life sort of took off and
Yeah, and a couple years ago, I got a phone call from his producer, and a younger guy, and he goes, "Hi, I'm doing this science fiction movie, and I'd never done a science fiction movie. Oh, this sounds like fun, Now I'm like lost in space, right?" So he said, "Yeah, we want you to be the voice of a robot." Okay, why not? That's fine. And I said, "Well, why me? What's with my voice? I don't do voiceover stuff." And he goes, "Well, because I grew up," and he was a young kid. He was like his mid-30s. In college, we used to watch Lassie at, 2 in the morning, right? And it was such a kick. And I loved the relationship that the dog had with you in like taking care of you. Well, the robot is like the dog. He takes care of the human. And that's how he put it all together. And so now, yeah, you remember the Castaway with Tom Hanks and
yes,
Wilson the ball, right? Well, my robot is like a Wilson. He's a floating ball with eyes and stuff, and he's really kind of cool. But so, it goes on. And if you get a phone call and they want you to do something and you can do it, why not?
you do it. Well, I'm glad that the robot was a nice robot because I was thinking like evil Timmy from outer space or something like that.
But he does kill people. And I've always wanted to be that serial killer, that would be fun too, but who knows?
Wow. This has been a lot of fun speaking with you, John.
Right.
I'm so glad that my wife and I started watching. I don't admit it to everybody, but I like watching Hallmark movies. I like watching Little House on the Prairie.
Okay.
But now I'm going to be back watching Lassie again because it's really feel good, and I think a couple of my grandkids might be interested in watching as well because it really, as you mentioned before, it's a happy sort of tears. It's a sense of family and love and caring, an animal caring for a human caring for an animal. I mean, there's simple stories that just make you feel good. And I don't know. I don't know any other way to put it.
And it's so true. We have a new grandson. He's not quite two, and a 5-year-old. And once the two, not yet, but on the 5-year-old, once you get them past that it's black and white, they fall right into the kid and the dog, and it's like, ooh, I like this, and the other thing is they learn something from every episode, whether it be a moral, whether it be right or wrong or whatever, there's something to learn. It's not just, something just to look at. So, and I guess that's why they've held up so long, and people are still watching.
When I was, I think about 7, we got a color TV set. It was like 1965 or maybe 66. And I remember being concerned and asking my father, but can I still watch the black and white shows on the color TV set?
Oh, wow. Wow. How
And one
cool
of
is
them was
that?
Lassie.
Yeah. Well, just before we go,
Yeah.
249 half-hour episodes is what I filmed in the 7 years, only 5 in color. And that was at the very end. And that was when it was because they were going to turn it into a movie. It was 5 consecutive Sundays. And then in Technicolor. And then it became Lassie's Great Adventure as a movie.
Oh,
But
that's
but
great.
yeah, only 5 in color because CBS, we were CBS and they were the last to go color. Yeah, NBC with the Peacock #1, ABC the following year, and then the third year CBS went color. So
Well, I think that's terrific. And one last thing I did want to, your book, Timmy's in the Well, the Jon Provost story. Did you co-write that with your wife? I
oh
understand.
yeah, Lori. Well, like I told, I'm dyslexic. You don't want me to write it. I can tell it, but you don't want me to write it. No, Lori Jacobson Provost, author. She's a Hollywood historian, and that's kind of how we met. We're coming on 26 years of marriage, and or 27. I don't know. I'll find out. Yeah, and so I told the story to Lori, and she put it down on the paper.
Wonderful. I went to your website, jonprovost.com, and it's Jon
Correct.
Provost.com. And I saw there's a section there for her books, and that your book is in there, as well as some other really super interesting ones. So I advise people to go check it out.
All right, great. Yeah, she's a lot of cool Hollywood stuff, and she has one really fun one. If people that like to cook, it's called TV Dinners. It's really cool to check that one out. And then also our new products on provostpets.com.
Absolutely. And are you going to be appearing anywhere soon?
Yes, at the Cherry Blossom Festival. Can't wait for that. It's Lord, let's see, I think this would be my third time maybe in like the last 10 years or something. And just a wonderful time down there. And as a matter of fact, my wife is from St. Louis, Missouri, so it's kind of close. Yeah.
That's great. We've interviewed quite a few people who have attended the Cherry Blossom Festival, including the founder, Nicholas Inman. We interviewed him as well. And it sounds like a really fun event. And I think one year soon, my wife and I are going to go out to visit, and I hope you're there.
Oh, it's worth it. It's worth it. They have so much fun, so many things going on, and so many people, like you mentioned. Earlier you mentioned you like Little House on the Prairie. Yes, they have a lot of people from that because Ingalls wrote the book Little House on the Prairie right near. So yeah, it all fits in.
Well, it's terrific. But anyway, I hope the weather's okay out there and that you're all safe out there in California. And I
Oh,
wish the
thank
very
you.
best to you at the Cherry Blossom Festival. And give my best to your wife, Lori, okay?
I definitely will, and thank you so much.
John, have a good one, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Same here.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your History, Your Story. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, X, and Instagram to stay connected. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have questions, comments, or a story to share. Until next time, be well and God bless.